For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Madam Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.Res. 590 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
House Resolution 590, resolution recognizing and honoring Hunter Scott for his efforts to honor the memory of the captain and crew of the USS Indianapolis and for the outstanding example he has set for the young people of the United States.
The House of Representatives, October 10th, 1998. Did the voice of the gentleman from Florida sound familiar? That was former Republican Congressman Joe Scarborough. And the mention of the USS Indianapolis might sound familiar too. That was the U.S. Navy cruiser torpedoed by the Japanese during World War II. The story of its sinking by a sub was shared in a speech by Congressman Scarborough and a stirring soliloquy from a salty, seasoned shark hunter in Steven Spielberg's seminal 70s summer spectacular, Jaws. But the mention of Hunter Scott might be new to you. So let's learn more about Hunter Scott and his connection to Congressman Joe Scarborough and their connection to the USS Indianapolis, as this episode of C-SPAN's Podcast The Weekly revisits a blockbuster movie and marks the 50th anniversary of Jaws. The USS Indianapolis was sunk in 1945. Jaws came out in 1975. Hunter Scott was born in 1985. Joe Scarborough joined Congress in 1995. And now, in 2025, it all comes together. We return to Congressman Joe Scarborough on the House floor, October 10th, 1998.
On the cover of the New York Times earlier this summer was a headline, "A Boys' School Project Aims to Revise History." And it told the story of Hunter Scott, a middle schooler who is trying to change history as was written 50 years ago. In the closing days of World War II, the USS Indianapolis had its hull pierced by 3 Japanese torpedoes. 12 minutes later, the cruiser went down. On board were almost 1,200 crew members, and only 300 survived, the others dying of shark attacks and exposure. For half a century, the 316 remaining surviving crew members of the worst disaster in naval history tried in vain to defend the honor of their captain, Charles McVay. This year, a new secret weapon was employed in their quest, and that weapon was a 13-year-old boy named Hunter Scott. 2 years ago, Hunter came to my district office to show me a middle school history project that he had made. Now, this extraordinary history project actually contained clear, convincing evidence that the Indianapolis's crew, bravery, and the injustice done to their captain, who was wrongly court-martialed as a useful scapegoat during the disaster, needed to be revised. And as it turns out, Hunter's history project is now turning out to make history itself. We reviewed Hunter's report, including newly declassified documentation that he had dug up, and we decided that we wanted to help him out. Hunter's documents showed that Captain McVey was not given the intelligence that would have helped him avoid the disaster, and that he did nothing improper to justify the court-martial. The legislation was introduced in Washington and gained almost 100 co-sponsors, including those of Ms. Carson, who certainly helped out a great deal, Ms. Mink, and also Mr. Abercrombie. Then Hunter came to Washington and created quite a stir. He commanded international media coverage and met with many key members of the House and Senate, including Speaker Gingrich, Majority Leader Armey, and National Security Chairman Floyd Spence. The New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, Forbes, the Atlanta Constitution, and media outlets across the world followed Hunter's work. But because of some entrenched interests who do not want to admit that they were wrong 50 years ago, this bill did not get a chance to come up on the floor this session. That's why we're here today, to pass a congressional resolution honoring Hunter Scott and recognizing the brave Indianapolis crew, since Hunter is a shining example of all that is good about our young people today.
Republican Joe Scarborough was joined by Democrats like Maryland Congressman Elijah Cummings.
I certainly hope that, and I'm sure someone is doing it, will videotape what is going on here today so that Hunter Scott will have an opportunity to see the honor which has been paid to him by all of us. And to him, I want to make sure he understands that we take his cause very, very seriously, that we honor him because he is right. We honor him because he has stood up for what he knew to be right. We honor him because he has brought Republicans and Democrats together to right a wrong.
Congressman Scarborough referred to another Democrat. Here's Indiana Congresswoman Julia Carson 3 years later, July 27, 2001.
I'm pleased to call the attention to the House of Representatives to a decision by the Department of the Navy that exonerates the late Charles Butler McVey III, captain of the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis. He was court-martialed and convicted 56 years ago after his ship sunk in the closing days of World War II. The survivors of that tragedy, Mr. Speaker, have relentlessly sought to have Captain McVey vindicated, and those who remain are relieved by the Navy's long-delayed yet justifiable decision. On May 14, 1999, I ushered an 11-year-old student from Florida to drop in the box here, HJ Resolution 48, into the system for consideration by the House. Hunter Scott went to a movie in Pensacola, Florida, and saw Jaws, in which there was a brief soliloquy about the sinking of USS Indianapolis. Hunter's interest in the ship's disaster was the beginning of a school history project, trips to Washington, D.C., media attention, and an upcoming movie. Language to exonerate Captain McVey was inserted in the Defense Authorization Act of 2001. The legislation expressed a sense of Congress that Captain McVey should be exonerated because some facts important to the case were never considered by the 1945 Court-Martial Board. Classified data were not even made available to the board. Survivors of the greatest sea disaster in our Navy's history at that time sought to have their captain's name cleared for periods that spanned several years, oftentimes efforts that drew controversy. The magnitude of the crusade was elevated by this young man's trip to the movies, his campaign to derive justice for the captain and the crew. Indeed, one person can make a difference.
Another mention of Hunter Scott and Joe Scarborough from Lynn Vincent. She wrote a book about the Indianapolis. In 2018, Lynn Vincent was on Book TV.
Hunter Scott was an 11-year-old boy who saw the Indianapolis story on Jaws and thought it would make a good history fair project. And he teamed up with a legislator named Joe Scarborough, who is now Morning Joe, and we're going to be on there, by the way, and really for the first time in decades brought tremendous attention to this case.
Another telling of the Hunter Scott and USS Indianapolis and Jaws story, along with another mention of Joe Scarborough from political historian Carl Cannon. He appeared on C-SPAN's Q&A program in 2017 to discuss his book, On This Date, From the Pilgrims to Today, Discovering America One Day at a Time.
And it's a story that, to me, tells, it's so many different stories wrapped into one. First of all, this ship is sunk. I mean, it's a tragedy. And all these guys are thrown in the water. And for 3 days, nobody's even looking for them.
World War II?
Yes.
And it was what kind of a ship?
It was a big one.
Cruiser.
It was a Navy ship.
I've read it.
You're a Navy man. It was a Navy ship of war, and Captain McVey, it's a cruiser. And it comes out of San Francisco. It had gone there for repairs, and it's got this secret mission. What's the secret mission? Well, there's this thing loaded onto it. It's very heavy. It's uranium. It's the components of the atom bomb that will be dropped in Japan and end World War II. Obviously top secret. So top secret that the Navy doesn't do the normal things they do. And this ship, after it delivers its cargo, it heads out to rendezvous what may be the battle for Japan. But it doesn't get an escort. There's no destroyer escort. Not enough people are aware it's missing. It's sent into submarine-infested waters. It is sunk with a submarine, and 900 guys go into the water. And the story is nobody's looking for them. And what happens? And what happens is they drown. They die of dehydration. Sharks eat them. It's a horrible story, but it's not in there because of its horror. It's in there because of and like I said, we take 5 days in the book, but it took years for the story to resolve itself. The captain is McVay, as court-martial. He's a movie star, handsome captain. Men love him. He was a scapegoat. He later is reinstated, but he never really recovers from this. He takes his own life. Years later, there's a boy in Florida who's watching the movie Jaws, and he's not a boy. This movie's been out 20 years. He's just a teenager. He's watching the movie, and Quint, remember, played by Robert Shaw in that movie, has that soliloquy where he talks about why he hates sharks. He was on the USS Indianapolis. Now, it's Hollywood, so they make it June instead of late July. I don't know why. They've got some other facts wrong, but it's a riveting story. And a lot of people who saw the movie Jaws in this country had never heard of it. They never heard of the Indianapolis.
Do you remember why you picked this in the first place?
Well, I picked it. It's a riveting story, but I picked it actually because at the end of the 5 days, there's a kid in Florida, and he finds out about this. He thinks he's just he's a kid in school, and he thinks Captain McVay's been railroaded, and he wants to do something about it. And he does do something about it. And I won't give away the whole story because it's a fun one, but Joe Scarborough has an interesting cameo in it, and eventually the Navy admits that McVay was blameless all these years later. And it still matters to his relatives, and it matters to the men who are on that ship, a handful who are still alive.
Congressman Joe Scarborough's work on behalf of Hunter Scott even caught attention of the other chamber. From May 25, 1999, here's Republican Senator from New Hampshire, Bob Smith, calling upon the president to award a citation to the final crew of the USS Indianapolis.
It's a great honor for me to rise this morning to share with my colleagues a brief story from the closing days of World War II, the war in the Pacific. The war in the Pacific where my father also saw combat as a naval aviator. This is a harrowing story with many elements: bad timing, bad weather, heroism and fortitude, negligence and shame, bad luck. Above it all is the story of some very special men, men whose will to survive shines like a beacon decades later. I should point out that it is because of the efforts of one very special 13-year-old boy in Florida that I have the privilege of introducing this bill today, along with many of my colleagues who are original co-sponsors. Hunter Scott, this young 13-year-old, worked for nearly 2 years on what started as a history project, and he compiled a mountain of clippings, letters, and interviews that ultimately led Congressman Joe Scarborough to introduce this bill in the House, and for me to do so in the Senate. Hunter, on behalf of the survivors of the USS Indianapolis, and behalf of the family of Captain McVay, and on behalf of the United States of America, thank you for your courageous efforts. For without your work, without your special attention, without your dedication and commitment, I wouldn't be here today to have this privilege and honor of introducing this legislation.
In 1999, Senator Smith arranged hearings on Captain McVay and the Indianapolis in front of Virginia Senator John Warner's Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator Warner had previously served as Secretary of the Navy, and during his tenure, he reviewed the McVay case several times. As Navy Secretary, John Warner took no action to absolve McKay, instead allowing the conviction to remain unchallenged. The 1999 hearings changed that, as we hear directly from U.S. Navy veteran Harlan Twible. He was an officer on the USS Indianapolis when it sunk. In a 2016 interview on American History TV, Harlan Twible mentioned both Senator Smith and Warner.
Senator Smith heard my story. I went to him finally, I think it was 2000, 2001, and he had a hearing, and I'll never forget Senator Warner, after we had the hearing, he came down and put his arm around my shoulder. He said, when I came into this room, I felt one way. Going out, I feel another. And I knew that I had won, and the captain had been exonerated.
The USS Indianapolis was sunk on July 30th, 1945. On July 30th, 2020, the 75th anniversary of the sinking, the crew was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. Among the ceremony speakers, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody. He spoke on behalf of the 8 survivors of the Indianapolis still alive. Tody was former commander of the nuclear attack submarine USS Indianapolis and was instrumental in the survivors' fight to clear the name of Captain McVey.
The survivors of the sinking of Indianapolis struggled for almost 5 days in the water just to survive. Then for the next 5 decades, they continued to fight. They did not fight for recognition for themselves. They did not fight for restitution from the Navy for the awful fact that they were forgotten in the water and left to die. They fought to clear their captain's name.
As for Hunter Scott, he's been on C-SPAN as well, 2 times. His story was the inspiration for a book by Pete Nelson called Left for Dead, A Young Man's Search for Justice for the USS Indianapolis. Joe Scarborough has multiple mentions in that book. In 2002, as a 12th grader at Pensacola High School, Hunter Scott appeared on Book TV. Speaking to the Union League of Chicago about the book Left for Dead, he talked about Joe Scarborough.
So here comes a little 6th grader who gets interested in the Indianapolis. And for many of these men, it's the first time that they are willing to open up and really share their story and the horrors that they experienced during World War II when the Indianapolis sank. And for a lot of them, it was the first time that they had told anybody. Many of these men had not even told their family members what they decided to tell me. So I think that they felt that I would be the guardian of their story. So once I was disqualified from the state history fair competition, which was unfortunate, but once I was disqualified from the competition, I displayed my project in my congressman's office, Congressman Joe Scarborough from Pensacola, Florida. And people were just coming in and lining up outside of his office and just spending hours going through the thousands of documents that I had brought to attention, many of them new and declassified under the Freedom Information Act in 1990. And they were just coming in and spending hours reading the first-hand accounts. Some of them even knew people who knew people that were on the Indianapolis. And so it was just Congressman Scarborough called me in his office one day and he said, "Hunter, you've got to tell me what's going on here. Why are people coming in my office not to talk to me, but to look at your project?" So I told him the story and of the court-martial of Captain McVey. And he agreed that we really needed to do something to try to exonerate Captain McVey and to try to bring honor to the men aboard the Indianapolis.
2 years earlier, Hunter Scott spoke to students about the importance of youth activism. He was introduced with TV news coverage of his efforts, including this clip of Congressman Scarborough.
When Hunter first came into our congressional office to show us the project, we knew pretty quickly that something needed to be done in Washington about it, and we knew that Hunter's hard work would be what would help us succeed. We introduced a bill that would actually revisit the issue of Captain McVey. There would be a sense of Congress that Captain McVey was innocent of the charges, and also we wanted to recognize the survivors of the Indianapolis for their bravery during the war.
And now a bonus clip, not about Hunter Scott, but the person who created Jaws. Steven Spielberg made the movie, but the book Jaws was written by Peter Benchley. Long before Jaws, Benchley worked for the Washington Post, then as an editor for Newsweek. Then he went to the White House. In 1967, Peter Benchley became a speechwriter for President Lyndon Johnson. His boss in the Johnson White House was Joseph Califano, LBJ's top domestic aide. In 1986, Joseph Califano told this story about Peter Benchley.
One of my jobs was to supervise some of the speechwriters, and one night I fired Peter Benchley because he couldn't write. He went on, of course, as you know, to write Jaws and other bestsellers. And President Johnson used to speak about 10 or 12 times a day, every day. These were Rose Garden speeches or Roosevelt Room speeches. He'd speak to on Transportation Day, or he'd speak to some savings bond people, a group of corporate executives, or doctors, or high school honor students. And the president never read these speeches before he delivered them. They were typed on yellow index cards about that big, with big speech type. And if they involved foreign policy, Walt Rostow and Mac Bundy before him would read them and clear them. And if they involved domestic policy, I would read them. And it was the first thing I did every day. when I'd come to work. And I went in the next day after this conversation with Peter Benchley. There was the stack of yellow cards on my desk at 7:15, and the top card said, "They say you can't increase defense spending and balance the budget. Well, I say you can, and I'm going to tell you how. They say you can't rebuild the cities of America and cut taxes. Well, I say you can, and I'm going to tell you how. They say you can't reduce unemployment to 3% with no danger of inflation. Well, I say you can, and I'm going to tell you how." I picked up that top card, and on the next card it said, "Okay, Lyndon, you're on your own."
That's it for this episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly. The USS Indianapolis was the last major American ship sunk by the Japanese during World War II. And if you want to learn more about it, and more mentions of Jaws in Congress, search the C-SPAN Video Library. For now, thanks for listening, and happy searching.